October 18th, 1975, in Kansas City. Police pulled a man named Evan Rivers from the ravaging rubble of a burning building, with thick black smoke spilling into his lungs. Firefighters on the scene sent for an ambulance, certain that he would not survive the night. 3 months later, Rivers awoke from a coma. When he finally regained consciousness, investigators asked him if he was a smoker or left on any electrical appliances. Trembling with fear, he told them it was the clown. I can still hear him laughing. Those of a weak disposition or with coulrophobia, beware, as this is the terrifying full account of what happened to Evan that he told to the police. It was one of those nights when you think you're all alone in the house, but deep down, in the darkest corners of your mind, you know that something or someone is with you. My suitcase stood at the foot of my bedroom and unnervingly tipped over of its own accord. I had just moved into a rented house in Kansas City and packed all my life inside this case. I'd found a job at a meatpacking plant across town with an immediate start date. I basically found the first place I saw in the papers, and to my surprise, I had my own house for only $100 a month. I thought I had struck gold. That is, until I met the clown. When my landlord, Austin, showed me around, I was instantly hit with that old house smell, something that reminded me of my grandmother's house back home. As we walked through the house, I was suddenly startled by the living room. Staring at me above the fireplace was an old painting of a clown with this burst of orange hair and a shiny red nose. He looked friendly enough, at least until you properly looked at his eyes. There was a dark side to these eyes, as if the laughter was coming from a more sinister place. I missed the days when the artwork would just have a nice little bridge going over a river or a wildflower meadow. Austin never mentioned the painting, as if he was too embarrassed to bring it up. Nonetheless, it seemed like a silly reason not to sign a lease because of a creepy clown painting. Thinking I could always put it in a cupboard if I had to, I signed anyway. But now, at 2 a.m., as I heard the loud tick of the radiator failing to produce much heat and clutched the blanket tightly against my body, I deeply regretted that decision. As that creaking, the tap, 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 and the chalkboard-like squeaking of the radiator continued, I wondered whether these were old house noises or something much more ominous. As I tossed and turned across the bed, I realized that most of these things could be my mind playing tricks on me. This sounds like a crazy thing to say, but my mind and I never seemed to get along. I felt like whenever it came to school, getting good jobs, or building relationships, my mind would always get in the way, as if it knowingly wanted to destroy my life. I'm 40 years old, with no family to mention. The little friends I had were now busy with their own lives, and it's as if they're ashamed of how little I've made of myself and don't want to know me anymore. Deep down, I know there's something wrong with me, something stopping me from having a wife and a family and a steady job, but I don't want to confess this and be brought into the madhouse either. As I lay awake that night, I felt like it was my mind playing tricks on me once again. That is, until I heard the banging from downstairs. I went to investigate and slowly crept down. Nothing was there. I poured myself a glass of water and was ready to walk back up the steps. I shook my head and thought, here we go again. The night before I start a new job, and here is my mind waking me up and making sure I don't get enough sleep. And then I looked into the living room and was reacquainted with the clown. I'm not sure if it was my lack of sleep, but it looked as if the clown was staring straight at me. as if his eyes had moved slightly to the left. Now, I don't know how an artist could create that effect in a painting. It's supposedly what the Mona Lisa can do, but not what you'd expect from some random clown picture in a run-down house in Kansas City. As I walked away from the painting, I felt this cool chill across my neck, as if there was a powerful force trying to stop me from moving away from it, clutching against my neck. Deciding I'd feel better if I took the clown painting down and stored it away, I reached up and I grabbed the edges of the old-looking bronze frame. As I tried pulling it from the wall, I found I could barely lift it. The frame was far heavier than it looked, and even using all my strength, it barely moved an inch. I told myself I was just tired, and it was fine. I went back to bed, but as soon as I closed my eyes, the nightmares began. I was frozen in my bed, unable to move, and above me hovered that clown with its wild orange hair and evil stare. It was holding something that glistened in the darkness, a knife. I screamed inside of my head, my words soundless, as a clown traced the knife over my skin and started shredding through it as if it had the delicacy of flower petals. He laughed, a sinister, echoing laugh. My silent screams continued even after I woke up. I sat up in bed. My own sweat had dripped into my eyes, making the room seem contorted. I checked my arms for those cuts, relieved to find them unharmed, and then I pressed my hand to my thudding heart, relieved I could move once again, and that it was just a dream. Still, this unnerved me, so the next morning I avoided the living room, and I left as hastily as I could, but that darn clown infiltrated my mind. I caught glimpses of him on the bus to work, by the hedgerows, and lingering in the shadows of the pub. It was my first day on the sawdust-covered factory floor, surrounded by hordes of men wearing white jumpsuits and gloves, yet that clown was nowhere, yet everywhere. I saw him in a flash of my colleague's orange hair, and in the reflection of another colleague's eyes. Meatpacking required intensive hygiene procedures, like washing our hands every 30 minutes. It was intense, but it was paying for a new life and hopefully building towards something even better. So I put my clown sightings down to the pressure and lack of sleep. Halfway through my shift, another guy came up to me and shook my hand. He said, "Hey, how you doing? I'm Tom. I saw you on the bus today. I actually live across the street from you. You're down at number 13, right?" He told me about the area, and then he said, "Listen, I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but there's something you should know about your house and that clown painting." My ears perked up on hearing this. I hadn't told a soul about that clown painting, so how did he know about it? Before he could tell me any more, his supervisor called him back. On the bus ride home, I looked for a spot to sit down and noticed Tom beckoning me towards an empty seat by his side. True to his word, he spelled it all out for me. He told me about Richard and Mary, a newly married couple who lived in the house. He anxiously looked around the bus and whispered quietly to me, "Once Mary got pregnant, they thought about leaving and renting a bigger property out in the suburbs. They were 1 week from leaving when the house caught fire." Tom continued on and explained, "Those flames, they were emerging from the living room, but due to her condition, Mary couldn't move quickly. Desperate to save his wife and unborn child, Richard ran straight into the living room and tried to stamp out the fire himself, but it was all ablaze, except for one thing. In the center of the living room, above the fireplace, a painting of a clown. Despite the massive blaze, this painting was somehow completely unharmed. Richard was in a coma, and he woke up 3 months later, cursing that clown." Tom got up as we reached our stop. I grabbed him by the hand and I said, "That painting is still there." Tom nodded and said, "Yeah, I bet it's in perfect shape, too." I was terrified to go back to my home that night. I took a long walk through a nearby park, but as nightfall crept in, I knew that in the end I was either sleeping in the house I was paying rent for, or on a bench in the park. A storm was brewing. I felt it in the changing air, so I went with the first option. To my astonishment, nothing happened. Despite the blustering winds outside, it was a relaxing sleep, as if the storm had blown away my worries. And when I woke up the next morning, I finally started emptying my suitcase, placing pieces of clothing into the closets and drawers, and making this place my home. In fact, I told my supervisor, Stu, about what happened, and he shook his head and said, "Hey, listen, Tom is sometimes full of baloney. He's a nice guy and all, but I would take everything he says with a pinch of salt." This provided me with some peace of mind, although I still found it strange he knew about the clown painting. I convinced myself he must have just known Austin and seen it firsthand. In the coming days, the clown painting did not seem to have the same power over me as it used to. The eyes were not really following me around the room anymore. I didn't see the clown out of the house, and I didn't feel that chill on my neck when I walked away. Still, something nagged at my curiosity. So when Saturday arrived, I decided to go down to my local library and investigate. At the bottom of the painting was the signature of the artist, Victor Halloway. I opened up a library account and I walked past all of the books and toward one of their computers. This contained newspaper archives, which would give me access to any news stories about Halloway, any public exhibitions, interviews, and any information about who this man is, or was. I needed to lift the veil of mystery surrounding this painting and learn that it is just some normal painting created by an ordinary artist. When I was searching for answers, I only ended up with even more questions. Horrifying questions. Searching Halloway's name did not generate results of art exhibitions at local galleries. Instead, his name was featured in a chilling criminal case. One news feature in the Kansas City Star contained the headline, "The Horrifying Enigma That Is Victor Halloway." In the summer of 1965, police in Kansas City were at their wits' end trying to capture a criminal. 10 people had been murdered, with many more expected, but the police were simply clueless about who could have done it. The police finally discovered a pattern. In all of these places where people had been suspiciously murdered, the circus was in town. The circus is the easiest place to get work for ex-convicts, as they don't do proper background checks. As long as they put on a show, they'll be given work. Foster's Circus traveled all over Missouri, and one of their most popular performers was Bozo the Clown. And Bozo the Clown was a character performed by a man named Victor Halloway, and the clown picture was a self-portrait. Halloway entertained families by day, but by night he had his real fun. Halloway had a dark history. He was charged with murder of his wife, Sally, but the jury verdict was not unanimous and he was eventually released. Halloway got a taste for murder, and with the circus, he could visit towns and cities he had no connection to and disappear a few days later. Victim after victim, and family after family, and town after town, they were terrified by his evil deeds. The 10th victim was a woman named Karen Hartley. On her body was a mint herb that could only be found in the local fields, exactly where the circus was. When police finally investigated the circus, Halloway had bragged about his evil deeds in his journal, writing minute-by-minute accounts of his actions. He spoke about his performance at the circus and then wrote, "At nighttime, the real show begins." And after an extensive murder trial, Halloway was given the death penalty. While being brought to the chair, he saw this as one final performance, like he was at the circus, one last time. He addressed what he considered the audience and said, "You can kill me now, but the show doesn't end here. This is only the beginning." I spent all day at the library, immersing myself in Victor's sick mind. Then, suddenly, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I jumped out of my seat and shook as I turned around in terror. It was the librarian, only She was freaking out at me and waving her arms about. I looked back at the computer, but it was now a wild burst of flames as orange as Victor's hair. I leaped back from the computer, tumbling over my chair. I used my jacket to put the fire out, and then I stared at the charred remains of the computer before I left. The librarian blamed faulty wiring. I agreed with her, but I didn't believe it. The whole experience was unsettling, and I knew what I had to do to try and ease my mind. When I got home, I decided to call Austin. I told him this was going to sound strange, but I really wanted this clown picture outside of my house. It was the work of a murderer and did not belong inside anyone's home. It did not belong anywhere. Art is where you reveal a part of yourself, part of your soul. And this painting was Halloway's admission of his twisted and warped mind. Austin said he had no idea and told me that he would be around first thing in the morning and would probably throw the painting in a dumpster where it belonged. Deep down, I knew that he was scared of the painting too, but he didn't want to think about it. At night, I was hoping for an uneventful sleep, one free of nightmares. However, all of the information I learned about Victor Halloway was now swimming around my mind. Why did he do what he did? How can that amount of evil come from one person, and what possesses them to do it? I was really angry at some of the newspaper articles written about him. They all talked about how he was mentally ill and evil, as if those two words were interchangeable. I'm mentally ill, and I wouldn't hurt a soul. Ultimately, I realized that he just enjoyed the power he had, that power of knowing that someone else's life was in his hands. He was an animal in its most basic form, hunting its prey. As I came to this conclusion, I noticed myself softly going to sleep. However, as my eyes closed, my nostrils suddenly perked up. It was smoke. I opened the door and a huge cloud of smoke engulfed me. I sensed the soot invade my nostrils and force its way down my mouth. I coughed violently and closed the door. As I shut it, I could hear laughter coming from downstairs, cackling through the roaring flames. Victor was trying to kill me. Smoke continued to invade my lungs. I went towards my bedroom window. I was willing to jump down. I would break a leg, but at least I would be alive. As I went to jump, a cloud of dust appeared in front of me. Dust in the form of a distorted, twisted clown face. I let out a scream, and then the fire claimed me, forcing me into darkness. I continued to hear the cackling laughter of a circus clown, the sound of someone really enjoying themselves. I heard the sound throughout my darkness. The laughter never stopped for the entire time I was trapped there in the nightmare. In my sleep world, Victor hovered over me, leaving me powerless to do anything but watch him as his knife sliced across my petal-thin skin. I endured this agony for 3 months. 3 months where all I did was sleep wide awake, taunted by that clown, trapped in his hellish, twisted vision, and begging for my mind to wake up. In the aftermath of this incident, Evan Rivers was sent to a mental hospital for treatment. His landlord, Austin, whose real name cannot be named for legal reasons, said that he did not remember a painting of a clown in that house or in any of his properties. Rivers claims that the landlord was merely covering his tracks. The picture would have definitely survived the fire, and in order to keep himself safe from Halloway, the landlord more than likely sold this painting, and now it's probably hanging inside another home, causing even more havoc. After all, as Halloway declared on the electric chair, "You can kill me now, but the show doesn't end here. This is only the beginning." For more scary horror stories, please subscribe.